Meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is approval of minutes from the May 25th, 2021 meeting. Can I have a motion? Phil, you're good for a motion. Thank you. A second? Eden, Ms. Blair. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, informational items. We have a monthly financial report. Hi, Julie.
Good afternoon. In your packet today is financial report for April. We are now in the fourth month of the fiscal year, so you should be about 33.3% of revenues. So far, the revenues on the general fund side were at 31% of budget compared to last year. We were only at 25%. Excuse me. Just to remind you guys that property tax distributions will not be received until June. So I will be a repeating record in the next couple of months report. The general county, which makes up about 65% of the general fund budget and revenues, outside of property tax revenues, are tracking at 42% of budget, which is even more favorable in April compared to last month. And everything that should be getting revenue year to date is at 33.3% or better, except for licenses and permits and interest income, which are still at 30% or a little bit higher, which is good. General fund expenditures are 1% better compared to budget since last year, which means that we have, the county has reduced expenditures by about $940,000, which is about 7.1% decrease. So what this means is that we have closed the gap in which usually the last 2 years in April for 2020 and 2019, we were at negative $2 million or higher than that. And now we're at a positive 524,000. So just with revenue performance plus expenditures cut, we are almost $3 million in the good. So we'll see how that continues. Some reasons why we have that is for many reasons, but sales tax continues to be favorable. I have the months broken down in the report as to which months are doing good. We expect to continue to see good trends for that. The next couple of months will be very pivotal as we enter into the 2022 budget cycle. One thing I want to bring to your highlight today is charges for services are actually exceeding budget expectation. So 34 of our 71 accounts we have budgeted are already meeting expectations. So that is favorable compared to last month, and income taxes are trending about 34% higher than 2020. And the only other, there's 2 funds that were added to the fund balance that were not in compliance to the policy, and that was County Highway and FICA, which are both also very heavily dependent on property taxes. So IMRF, County Highway, FICA, once those revenues come in, those should shoot back up. Same with risk. Those were the few highlights I had for you outside of what was written, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Any questions from anyone? I guess not, Julie. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're going to switch a little bit on the agenda and go to the Headington Oaks Financial Plan, which is page 22 if you're following along on your book.
Mr. Chairman, before Shauna starts speaking, Member Bryant has joined via phone, so if you wouldn't mind entertaining a motion a second to allow her to participate, that'd be appreciated.
Have a motion, please? Linda and Betty, thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. All right, okay. All right, go ahead, Shauna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The monthly financial plan, I'm sorry, I guess it's our annual financial plan that we provide every month. I always say that the wrong way. That is in your packet today. I just wanted to highlight a couple quick things that we've been talking about in concept over the last couple months. As you know, we have engaged RSM as our auditing firm to assist us with the bad debt project that we're doing. There was 2 phases with that. The first phase, we had a conference call with them on Friday. That first phase is almost complete. They should be wrapping that up here in the next few days, we hope. And then they will start phase 2. Phase 2 is where they go in and they verify and kind of do a mock audit, if you will, of the number that they had reached during phase 1. And so what this is to go through all of our outstanding Medicaid or Medicare accounts and determine what is the amount that we should submit as a write-off, if you will, through the Medicare cost report that's due this summer. And so when they do that, then we receive about 65, for those amounts that are written off, we receive about 65% reimbursement from the feds for that amount. So we really want to make sure that we get that number honed in. So in our call with them last week, they assured us that we're pretty sure what that number would look like. So I hope to have an update next month as to what those amounts will be, and then we'll talk about the timing of when those need to be approved versus submitted to the feds and all of that. So just wanted to give you an update on where we're at with that. So we're almost done.
Okay, thank you, Shauna.
Mhm.
Any questions for Shauna? Okay, Paul, on the financial report for Headington Oaks? That's page 16 if you need to look where it starts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet are the financials for Headington Oaks through April of 2021. And on the AR, as Shauna mentioned, been doing a lot of additional information requests for RSM, as well as working with the state's attorney's office on issues, and working with reaching out and talking with individual insurance companies, chasing down accounts receivable. So we're making progress. We've got about $2.45 million worth of accounts that are in some form of process right now, and we're hoping to have some breakthroughs on some of those very shortly. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Hi, Kate. Welcome. No questions? All right. Thank you. Appreciate it,
Mr.
Paul.
Chairman?
Okay, legislative update. Do we have anything, Scott, on that?
Mr. Chairman, I would just note that the year-end report from Anderson Legislative Consulting is in the packet. It's pretty exhaustive. Happy to try and answer any questions from those materials. Otherwise, I'll just leave it to the committee members to walk through those materials at your own leisure.
All right, thank you. Okay, review of executive session minutes. Turn it over to Judy.
Thank you. It remains the recommendation of the state's attorney's office that all previously held minutes continue to be held, because the need for confidentiality does still exist, and to also destroy executive session audio recordings that are more than 2 years old, except for those that pertain to pending litigation.
Can I have a motion? Jenny and Eden for a second. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, discussion items. We have the FY 2022 budget, which has already begun with the elected officials starting to calculate their incomes. So I'll let Scott give the report.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's June. That means that it's time to start discussing the FY22 budget process. As we have done for the last several years, we'll use this time to also report out performance for FY20 now that those financials are audited. We'll also report out some current year information, although you heard quite a bit of that in the monthly financial report from Julie, and then start to talk about FY22. Just from everyone's recollection, our process is unchanged from last year, where we have opportunity for input from this body, in addition to submittals from all the offices and departments, leading up to the adoption of the budget. This is the proposed calendar for the year. The 2 dates in red, which are this Friday and July 16th are submittal deadlines for initial numbers for the offices and departments, this week being revenues, next month being expenditures. The tan area in August is where we spend time meeting with each office or department to review their request. As I've talked to you, Chairman, I think we'd like to work with the committee and continue the process that was started last year, where we engage committee members in those discussions. And so we'll work with you and the rest of the committee to figure out which members would like to be engaged and how we coordinate those schedules. Then during the month of September, the finance team pulls the recommended budget together from all the requests and all the feedback we received. Right now, our goal is to release the recommended budget on Monday, October 11th, which means that we're ideally targeting adoption on November 11th, which would be your regular business meeting in November. Legally, we have until, I believe it's December 22nd to actually adopt it, so we've got some room on the back end to do that. But the budget does need to be a public document for a minimum of 30 days before you would adopt it. If you're more oriented towards a list, this color-coded list just corresponds exactly with what was in the calendar view on the previous slide. All right, so final numbers for FY20. These are for all funds. Revenues exceeded the revenue budget by approximately $12,600,000. If you recall, last year, as a result of the pandemic, we forecasted what change in revenue and loss of revenue might be, but we didn't actually amend the revenue budget to reflect what those estimates and projections might have been. So this overage in revenues is in relationship to the originally adopted budget. A big portion of why we did exceed revenues is because in the fourth quarter, we refinanced the bonds from the Peoria Riverfront Museum, and that was approximately $20 million, which you see in the other financing services row of the top half of the chart. Absent that, obviously, revenues would have been less than budgeted. On the expenditure side, we saw operating performance be roughly $8.6 million over budget. Again, 20 million of that almost 20 million of that directly attributable to the refinancing of the museum bonds. So if you actually take that out of take that context and just look at our operating and our capital expenditures less the refi, it'd be roughly $12 million better than the period 6 revised expenditure budgets that you approved in May of last year that went into effect June 1st. As it relates to the original adopted budget, we were actually $720,000 and change better in performance than what was originally adopted in the fall of 19. Specific to the general fund, where there is none of the dollars associated with the museum refinancing are nested here. They're in the debt service fund. Here we see that revenues exceeded the original budget by $2.3 million and change. Expenditures were better both from the revised period 6 budget and better than the original adopted budget. Period 6 revision being roughly $274,000 better performance-wise and almost $2.5 million better from the original adopted budget. That means that we added roughly $5 million of fund balance in the general fund. A couple of charts to kind of graphically show this change in general fund reserves over time. This uses data from the fall of 2016. So this is that which was the first time we saw this chart and we presented this chart. This shows what would have happened, or what we projected would have happened between the fall of 2016 and now, had this body not taken corrective actions for the FY17 budget, and even including last year's budget in face of the pandemic. So just for reference perspective, this includes audited financials from FY 2008 to 16. It includes the FY 17 adopted budget, and then the projections that we made in the fall of 2016 for FY 18 through 21. And you can see that we never recovered to your fund balance policy of 24%, which is the black line, in that in mid-19 we would have started running a deficit in the reserves of the general fund. Here's what the actual performance in the general fund looks like since over the same period of time, using actual audited financials from 2008 through 2020, your adopted budget for this year, and then FY 22 through 34 for budget forecasts. The green line represents your written reserve policy of 24%. The gray line represents the unwritten goal of maintaining a 30% reserves in the fund balance. You can see that FY20, we finished the year with almost or roughly $19 million in reserves. In the general fund, that is approximately 44% of the expenditures for this year. Based on the economic activity that we saw in Q4 of last year and what we've seen so far this year, we did not change the model on the expenditure side of the projections. Those remain at a 1% growth year over year. But for FY 22, 23, and 24, we increased the revenue projection from 0.5% growth year over year to 1% growth year over year. And then from FY 25 out to the end, we've ratcheted that back to 0.5% growth year over year in revenues. Chart we first started showing last year. This is just tracking the recovery as it relates to job loss. You can see that in the second month of the pandemic, we were at almost 15% job loss. This is a nationwide statistic. And at this point, we're hovering just below 5% job loss as it relates to 0% was roughly January, February of last year. Starting to chart the graph for this recession is starting to flatten a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see how much further it goes out. But a good indication of the strong economic recovery that I think we all anecdotally are very much aware of. FY21 performance year to date, we heard Julie talk quite a bit about that in the monthly financial report. These charts show unaudited activity through 5 months. Straight line projection of 5 months of activity is 41%. As you heard from Julie, obviously we've not received property tax distributions yet. We have received roughly $500,000 of property taxpayers that prepay their property taxes. And then just from a timing standpoint, that's a major revenue stream. Another major revenue stream is the other taxes. That's a period 12 or period 13 revenue that again is generated from the county treasurer's office. And then at present, we have received only 3 months of sales tax receipts. So this data here reflects those 3 months of sales tax receipts, whereas we're obviously through 5 months of the year. So year-to-date activity through 5 months is 33% of the budget across all funds. On the expenditure side, we're at straight line projection would be 41%. Year-to-date activity would be 36%. Is actually at 36% of budget. So again, tracking well on the expenditure side, revenue side. Noticeably lagging, but lagging due to timing issues and based on where property taxes are and the other revenue streams, not overly concerned at this point. Specific to the general fund, you can see that none of the prepaid property taxes that Nicole's office has collected have been booked into the general fund. They've gone to other property tax supported funds, and 100% of that other taxes collected by her office is a general fund revenue. So again, timing of those two, which is $8.6 million of revenue, pretty substantial amount of revenue in the general fund. Those will occur as we receive distributions or for the other taxes in period 12 and 13. Intergovernmental revenues are tracking very strongly, as you heard Julie talk. That means that despite those timing issues, year-to-date activity through 5 months in the general fund is actually 39% of budget. On the expenditure side, we're tracking to 37% of the appropriation, which means that in the general fund, if the fiscal year were to end at the end of May, we'd be sitting on a $684,000 surplus in the general fund, plus whatever we would see come in for 2 months of sales tax activity and then any of the property taxes. Policy considerations for the committee, use of the $5 million of general fund surplus. Use of that, should you choose to do so, would put the general fund reserves at roughly 33 or 34% of expenditures, which is in excess of your not only your hard-written and adopted policies, but your unwritten policy. Budget schedule for the upcoming remaining months of the year. The FY22 tax rate, as Mr. Renault's committee has heard, and we've heard from the sheriff at the last county board meeting, where appropriate and applicable, addressing some wage pressures and select jobs classifications, not in everyone. And then use of our American Rescue Plan Act allocation. And we'll get to that with the next agenda item. But Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. Would appreciate some feedback from the committee on the surplus, the schedule, and the tax rate.
Do you have any insight as to what property values are going to be for next year, given the state the real estate market is in right now?
Great question, Mr. Renault. I asked the supervisor of assessments that exact same question last week when we met. We are about a month away from him being able to give us a relatively accurate estimation, but at worst flat, but he did anticipate some EAV growth.
Mr. Chairman, for Mr. Renault, he may or may not know it, the calculation is a 3-year rolling average. So whatever that plus is, it has to be averaged against the 2 prior periods. Mr. Chairman, you and I have had a couple of face-to-face discussions about the ARPA funds, some of the follow-on, I don't want to call them COVID funds because they're titled differently, and the tax rate. And given our status with the note due on Headington and the prospects of restoring the public health department to some 21st century outreach, I think this is a big conversation that we might want to invite others to. I've also suggested to you that we study what it would take to get some property tax relief to taxpayers, and that would be in the form of reviewing all of our levies to make sure that they're meeting the needs of their specific functions, and of course the general fund, which we fund a lot of other things from. And I hope we could get to that conversation before priorities or policies can be established.
I agree. I think we have to do that. Guess after this meeting, we'll set up some time to get together and go forward with that.
I also think in discussing with Mr. Dillon that it would be a great Thanksgiving gift to ourselves if we could get this done in October. Given what I think the issues are for Sheriff Asbell, our employees, getting our feet back underneath us, it might be nice just to accelerate that schedule. I would prefer that we accelerate that schedule, get it done a month ahead, so that it could even be ready for October, and that will free our staff to do what they ought to do, which is run their organizations and not be stuck in some intractable battle of the budgets between various elected officials or functions, excuse me, of the administrator. That would probably be a very welcome gift, given our standing financially today.
Thank you for your input. Anyone else? Linda?
I just want to mention that I think that discussion is really important in terms of deciding what we want to do with the revenue. I also think it's very important that we need to remember that unless we are able to pay off all the bonds for Headington Oaks, our taxpayers are going to continue to pay for those after we sell the building. And I am far more interested in not having the taxpayers do that than I am in thinking of some new exciting program to do.
Understand. Thank you. Anyone else? Jimmy?
Thank you, Chairman Fennell, and I know I've had this conversation with Scott numerous times, so he's probably tired of hearing, but as I commented to Andrew before, now that I've worked all the way around this horseshoe, and Phil would know, and Andrew would know, and anybody, but that cliff that Scott shows, that's something we've been staring at for almost the 16 years I'm down here. And as soon as we dig ourselves out and we say this is the last time we're going to have to do that, something else happens. So even just take as a grain of salt, it's the best projections. It's very, very conservative, but 10 years out, we're going to have another recession. There's going to be something that happens, and we're going to all be staring at those same decisions again. So just take that into consideration. Every time I felt like I've made a decision and ripped the Band-Aid off, it doesn't matter. It's a few years later that you're going to have to do something like that again. And to that, I've told Scott when we say we're in the black by these millions, I don't necessarily agree with that, because let's just take capital improvements as an example. We budgeted, was it 1.2? We took that all the way down to $1 million. So $1 million of that, and $1 million was just scratching the surface of our needs for our facilities. So $1 million of that extra was because we basically just wiped out things that we need to do and just kicked the can down the road. So this isn't surplus money, because on top of what we did, we cut things to the bone and said we're not going to do it this year. So, and then we rolled that budget over. So I appreciate everything Scott does, and Scott knows that that's my opinion on that. But that's one thing with that money, Chairman Fennell, is I'd like to see some of those restored in those budget items for the projects that we need to do, or other departments, things that we've done. So, and I know we got plenty of needs, and I look forward to a longer discussion. And 100% with Linda on, I would like to see debt paid off, bonds, depending on how it works going forward, because as you can see, even under these scenarios, you get to 2031 or whatever it was, and it still has us going off, or 2030, basically, mid-year 2030, those projections still have us not being able to pay what we need to do. So look forward to the discussion, and I appreciate you starting the discussion, Chairman Fennell.
Thank you. Yeah, just a comment, some of the things we did cut last year were some of the equipment, the highway department, the police department, on squad cars and the trucks, I know they cut, so probably, I know they're gonna reinstate some of those, for sure. Okay, any other comments, Ms. Blair?
I think that it's not hard to predict that wages will go up, that our amazing staff have done incredible stuff during this crisis that we've had in the past year. But I do think we definitely need to look at where it makes sense to readdress wages as we go forward. I think we're going to see an employment shortage if we don't do that.
And going along with your point of wage increases, that's what will skew this whole graph considerably, because it's the biggest part of our pie. Jennifer?
I would agree with, what everyone has said so far, specifically with what Dr. Blair just mentioned on wages. I've heard from constituents who have seen postings and been shocked at what positions are posted for. So we do have to look at trying to stay competitive there. I also think we need to make sure we're looking at how far and how thin we've stretched everyone during this difficult year too. And obviously, as Linda said, debt is a huge part. So I would agree with what everyone says, but I think taking a close look at the wage issue is a big deal.
Anyone else? No. Kate?
Two things I'm interested in getting information on. One is in relation to some of the grants. I know that, like, for example, Becky at PCAPS has been really good about getting grants for her department. I don't know if I've seen that information, displayed to us in terms of what portion of these budgets are grant funded, and kind of highlighting which of our department heads or specific areas of our organization who is going out and really being proactive about finding these grants to fund things kind of going above and beyond what the norm is, and how can we encourage more of that. There's a whole grants.gov page of grants that are available, and I'm sure there are other resources besides what's on that website. So how do we encourage our departments and staff to search for those grant funding options? The other thing is something that Scott had given me. I had asked for more information, and there was a spreadsheet that Scott sent me a while back that had some of it I think was useless information, but a lot of it I thought was useful information. It was something that he said used to be published with each budget book. What is that called? Do you know what I'm talking about?
What's the context aside from just the budget?
So it was like a survey that each department did, and it kind of gave a summary of
So it's more performance metrics, and it in the past it had devolved into more outputs than outcomes, and where there were outcomes, they didn't tell a good story of how well we deliver those services.
Okay.
It's a matter of processed X. Not to pick on any one department, but I'll pick on planning and zoning for a second. They issued X number of building permits, would be an output. An outcome would be, a good outcome would be the amount of time it took to process a building permit application, or the customer satisfaction of the one receiving the building permit, versus a bad outcome, which would be how many building permits are issued correctly. So a reset of performance metrics in management would be something that, if that's important to the body, that this committee consider, or we would bring up during the strategic planning sessions this summer and fall.
I think on some level some of that information is useful, because if, back in the 90s we had, I don't know, 500 visitors per week in our departments, and now we have 20 because people can do things online. I think that's useful information to make decisions about what we're spending our resources on. So I think looking at some sort of metrics other than just budgetary, I think would be helpful, and I think it will help the budget process.
Ms. Blair?
Going on that, if it's possible to actually measure outputs, outcome, and impact, that'd be great. If we could actually measure all three and it's not too onerous, because knowing what percentage of people come in, but also knowing what that means, right? So the fact that fewer people come to visit us could be that we're actually more efficient at doing things online, and that's a good thing. So having all those measures, if not too onerous to the departments, would be nice to have.
Any others? Okay, we got a lot of input. Oh, I'm sorry, Phil. Go ahead.
Certainly, I've been listening to everybody, and I totally agree with many of your comments and so forth. And one thing that I've always tried to be, and I think most of you have tried to be, responsible. Now, I got a little bit excited. I didn't jump up and down when Scott talked about this $5 million surplus and so forth, because Jimmy comes along and he gives me a low blow on, looking at something that, is going to happen. Probably, what's that bad thing that's going to happen, Jimmy? I know we'll face something in the next few years, because we generally do. But the thing that I really hope we do is perhaps give some relief back to the people that have helped us in the past. Let's face it, different departments took some sacrifices. The sheriff is one, state's attorney's office, and where some of the others were and so forth. But health insurance for our employees, the fact that they took some furloughs, they made some sacrifices. So let's not forget the people that make this county operate, and that's our employees.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, the last thing that we have under discussion is the American Rescue Plan Act. You want to give a little update on that? Getting into Mr. Rand's time.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This has a couple more slides in it than the budget slide deck. And for those of you that may or may not have seen the city manager's slide deck, you're going to see some repeat information. That's because all of us in our line of work are basically working off the same source document and are creating basically the same slide decks. I've seen at least 24 from my peers across the country that have essentially the same information. So just quickly today, I'm going to share with you what funds are available, the eligible and ineligible uses, some other information in the Act related to reporting and deadlines, and other buckets of money that are outside our allocation, and then potential uses. So funds available, if everyone recalls, the Act was $1.9 trillion in total. County governments nationwide were allocated $65.1 billion direct allocation from the U.S. Treasury. Municipalities greater than 50,000 in population also received direct allocation from the U.S. Treasury. Those smaller will go through their state governments. In Illinois, between local governments and the state's allocation, it works out to be just a shade over $13 billion, 13.23 to be precise. 5.68 of that going to local governments. Here within Peoria County, our allocation is 34.8. The city of Peoria's is 47. And then those are the only two in our county to receive direct allocations from the federal government. The municipalities from Bartonville down to West Peoria will receive theirs through the state of Illinois. All combined, it's a little over $86 million. The county and the city of Peoria have already received their first tranche of their total allocation, which was 50%. I reported, I think, either last month or in a weekly update that we've received ours, and Nicole has already deposited that and actually has put it in short-term investments to maximize what interest income we can. Bartonville through West Peoria will receive their first allocation. I believe it's in July, and then all units of government will receive their second half of the allocation roughly 12 months after they receive their first, whether it be in May for the county and the city of Peoria or in July, August for all the other municipalities. In the Act, there are 4 primary funding objectives. The first is support urgent COVID-19 response efforts. Second is to replace lost public sector revenue and to strengthen support for vital public services and help retain jobs. Third is to support the immediate economic stabilizations for households and businesses. And fourth is to address systemic public health and economic challenges that have contributed to unequal impact of the pandemic. So eligible uses. The Act has 6 categories of eligibility. The next several slides we'll walk through each one of these 6. The first being supporting the public health response. So within this category, these are things that we could use our allocation on. We could use it for services to contain and mitigate the spread of COVID-19. We could use it on behavioral health care services, and we could use it on payroll and covered benefits for public health services and public safety staff, to the extent that they worked on the COVID-19 response. Addressing the negative economic impacts, we could do any one of these 4 things: deliver assistance to workers and families, and that's not specific to our team members. Those are residents and taxpayers of Peoria County. That would including support for unemployed workers, aid to households, and survivors benefits for any victims. We could create a program to support small businesses with loans or grants or in-kind assistance. We could speed the recovery of impacted industries. They're specifically called out in the Act with tourism, travel, and hospitality sector. So if we wanted to, you could create programs that addressed and helped out those 3 sectors in our community. And lastly, in this category, you could rebuild public sector capacity by rehiring staff, replenishing any state unemployment insurance benefit funds, and implementing economic relief programs. Replacing public sector revenue loss. There's several slides related to this category. How we could the purpose for using these is to ensure continuity of vital government services. Second is how revenue loss is calculated using a formula based on a 4.1% adjusted annual growth. Then any recipients can use those dollars on multiple programs, which a future slide here will discuss. So when we calculate the revenue loss formula, there are specific things that are not allowed to be in that formula, and there are specific things that should be in that formula. Liquor store revenues, proceeds from the issuance of debt, refunds and other correcting transactions, revenues from utilities, intergovernmental transfers within the organization, and federal transfers are things that cannot be included in that calculation. Just about everything else, though, can be included in that calculation. How can we use these dollars, and how can we not use these dollars? We can use them to directly provide services or aid to citizens, pay-as-you-go infrastructure and capital projects, cybersecurity, healthcare, and public safety. We cannot use it on debt service, principal or interest, and we cannot use it to build up our reserves. The chart here shows, using the formula, what our revenue loss would be. The base year is in blue, that's 2019. The green portion of the bars is our actual revenue, and then using the formula, the red is the extent of our revenue loss. And if you combine FY20 and 21, FY20 being actual audited financials, FY21 being what you originally adopted in the budget last fall. You'll see that 32.4 million would be able to fall into this bucket of our $34.8 million allocation. So the overwhelming majority could of our total allocation could fall within the revenue loss category, should you choose to use it that way. Fourth category that the Act outlined is premium pay for essential workers. You could use that for both directly and indirectly through grants to third-party employers. So again, not specifically our team members, but local business in our community. You should be prioritizing low and moderate income workers who face the greatest mismatch between employment-related health risks and compensation. And those key sectors include healthcare, grocery and food services, education, childcare, sanitation, and transit. And if you were to create programs in this category, must be fully additive to a worker's wages. The last two categories deal specifically with infrastructure, and there's two types. The first is water and sewer infrastructure, and sewer here includes both sanitary sewer and storm sewer. We obviously don't own and operate a water utility, and we don't own and operate a sanitary sewer utility either, but we have both local government. An example would be the Peoria Heights, or the private sector, that being Illinois American, that operate those utilities. And we have multiple sanitary districts that provide sanitary sewer infrastructure. Stormwater is where, if you wanted to use dollars in this category, you would most likely use them. It can be used for improvements to infrastructure and making eligible uses aligned to the EPA's project categories for clean water. The sixth and final category is broadband infrastructure. The focus here is on households and businesses that don't have access. The fund projects that deliver reliable service with a minimum of 100 megabits per second up and down. Once you get outside the city of Peoria in the urbanized area, looking at data provided by the FCC, there are large portions of the county that have 25 meg download and 3 meg upload, and portions of the county that have less than that. And the goal here would be to provide the 100 up and 100 down as reliable service for broadband. And then it would complement broadband investments made through other capital project funds. All of these categories, all six of them, if you remember the final bullet point of the intent of the Act, is to have an equity-focused approach to things, where we would have additional flexibility for the hardest hit communities and families, and that would be applicable to qualified census tracts, although we can make arguments for other areas impacted as well. If you look at Census Bureau data, there are a number of qualified census tracts in Peoria County. It should come as no surprise, though, that they are in the North Valley, the South End, the East Bluff, Central Bluff, and portions of the West Bluff in Peoria. Those are the definition of a qualified census tract is what HUD uses for their housing programs. That is why the city of Peoria is an entitlement community and receives direct funds from HUD every year for a variety of programs, and why we are not, because the rest of the county does not meet the definition for qualified census tracts. If you were to allocate dollars in any one of the categories, but with a focus on being equitable and equity-focused services, you could do so to address health disparities. You could do it to address housing and neighborhoods, educational disparities, and promoting healthy childhood environments. Many of these categories and topics we've talked to you about before, as far back as the fall of 2018, when we looked at portions of the south end of the North Valley in terms of what it meant to lost population, lost EAV, educational attainment, cost to the criminal justice system. So again, very similar geography to what we previously talked to you about. And if you were to choose to go down this path, several of the issues that we've talked about here, you could create or implement programs or fund existing programs that have a focus on solving these issues. Things you can absolutely, unequivocally not use these dollars for under the Act. Reducing net tax revenue. Although it says in the Act extraordinary payments for pensions, we don't have to worry about pensions based on how IMRF is funded. Cannot use it to increase your reserves for additional rainy day purposes, and then the funding of debt service, legal settlements, or judgments. Just some other information. There's reporting requirements that we'll have to make. The first one is by the end of August this year on expenses to date, and then we'll have quarterly reporting requirements through the end of the grant making period. We'll show what the dates are, key dates are here in the future, and it's also these funds are subject to the single audit. No problem there for us. We already receive enough federal funding that we have been preparing a single audit for every year for several decades. Milestone dates, in addition to the reporting requirements that are out there, the two most important dates are the last two on this list. That's 12/31/24, where all the funds have to be obligated, and 12/31/26, whereas all the funds must be spent. Any unspent funds remaining on 12/31/26 will go back to the U.S. Treasury. That being said, though, we obviously have some time to be contemplative and deliberative about how we would allocate the funds given to Peoria County. A couple of slides just to describe some of the other programs that are funded in the Act itself. So these comprise some of the $1.9 trillion that was allocated in the Act. There's $10 billion for coronavirus capital projects for states. All of these that I'm listing off are competitive grant programs. They're not direct allocations. So there would have to be the federal agency would have to create a grant program. There'd have to be a notice of funding opportunity or availability created. We'd have to apply for it. We'd be awarded those funds, and then we'd have to obviously go through the typical grant making process. There's $7.2 billion for emergency connectivity for schools and libraries for broadband. My initial reading of those of that portion of the bill might be able to be interpreted that the last mile, so that school-age children don't have to have their parents drive them to the school parking lot, so that they can actually do school online from their parents' vehicle, could be an eligible use of those dollars. There's just, I won't read through all of them, but another one I know the Greater Peoria EDC is applying for is the $175 million to create a community navigator pilot program. We'll see if they actually awarded theirs. There's another $7.25 billion for paycheck protection. There's $27.4 billion for emergency rental assistance for both rental assistance and emergency housing vouchers. There's another $9.96 billion in homeowner assistance as well. So several different buckets of competitive grant programs here that are available. A couple of slides about what the Government Finance Officers Association put out for guiding principles. The first is temporary in nature. As your own financial policy state, one-time revenues should be spent on one-time expenditures. That's essentially GFWA's first point. The second is scanning and partnering. So where possible, we might want to consider partnering with other agencies that have received funds so as to maximize the impact of those dollars. The third and final one is to take time and careful consideration. As we know, we've got until the end of 24 to to obligate those dollars at the end of 26 to actually spend them. The opportunity to do something that is impactful with generational money is what we have before us, and to be deliberate and contemplative about how we might do that would give us the best and most impact on whatever we're going to use the dollars on. Just some potential uses. My reading of the act, should you choose, or whatever you end up deciding to do with the health department and the Health and Human Services campus, whether you choose to remodel it or you choose to replace it, these dollars could be used to pay cash for that project. Other targeted capital improvement projects, targeted operational expense restoration. We could create programs or partner with other entities to administer programs for community and business support. We'd have programs that are targeted with partnerships for the equity-focused services. Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions. Obviously, this is the start of a lengthy conversation, not specifically asking for any policy direction today, but just wanted to get what the Act says and what the eligible and ineligible uses are, and how we might use those, what those categories are in front of the committee today.
Thank you very much. One of your statements early on, you said a lot of it could be culled for our past expenses and put in that category. Where could that be stored until we wanted to use it for other sources, other projects?
So, so lost revenue, vast majority of that. So, we can, that does not have to be, as long as it's used by the end of 26 and obligated by the end of 24, the Act and the guidance issued by the Treasury Department is going to be comfortable with wherever we place that. It's the long-term rainy day fund beyond the end of FY 26 that they would be concerned about. But if you wanted to park that money for a year while we figured it out, then you absolutely could do that, and you're still in compliance with what the Act says and the guidance from the Treasury.
Okay, that's right. Okay, thank you. Any other, Ms. Blair?
You gave us an end deadline for when we have to use the money. What kind of timeline are you looking at for us to start making decisions on this? Next couple of months, year, what?
Great question. I would think the first bite at that apple would be incorporated into the FY 22 budget process.
Any others? Okay, miscellaneous? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I had another question. So I understand why wages wouldn't want to be taken out of this, because that's a long-term thing past this. But could bonuses or something like that, a one-time income thing, go into this?
Provided it meets the criteria, potentially yes.
Any other questions? Okay, comment session, miscellaneous? Anyone? Okay, we will adjourn and get into Mr. Rand's.